Hello and welcome to this episode of Pause with Nandini. Today I have Yogesh Parmar with me, who many of the people who follow me may know as well. He writes beautifully and prolifically on Facebook, but he is much more than just what we see on Facebook. He's a leading behavioral scientist and the founder of GameChangers, which is India's fully integrated and diversified learning and development services enterprise. Now, we'll ask him to quickly explain what all those big words in there mean. But I know that he does these beautiful workshops all across the world. He's sitting in Barcelona right now, doing lots of interesting things. He has been recently nominated to the prestigious and select list of 100 emerging leaders in Asia by World Consulting and Research Corporation. He's a certified master facilitator, speaker, and coach. He's had some, the biggest clients, the biggest names ever. He's done these kind of courses and he's facilitated sessions for over 50,000 people. Probably that's growing exponentially now that he's traveling all over the world even more. But apart from all of those things, why I really wanted to have Yogesh on is that I find that he is able to go really deep into things that affect all of us, and perhaps we don't always have the articulation or the language even to talk about them. And it's not all cerebral. A lot of it is very grounded in his own experience, and I think that makes it very real. And I know he touches many, many hearts and minds with what he does. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nandini. Yeah, I had no idea you were going to ambush me with that introduction. I thought you were going to introduce the show. Thank you. Grateful to be here and joyous to be in conversation with you.
Lovely. One of the things that I wanted to, because it's about an hour, give or take, there's so much to cover. I thought I'd jump right into one of the first things we spoke about, which was self-worth and self-esteem. And just thinking about that, on the hierarchy of needs, I think it comes, it comes somewhere, I think it's fourth, self-esteem. And then he sort of divides it into higher and lower versions, which are internal factors and external factors and all of that. I wanted to ask you if you think in our age, those goalposts have somehow shifted or changed in terms of what are the things that contribute or inform self-esteem? How does that link to purpose, which we talk so much about now? So I'll let you talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, wow. Many moving pieces there. I think the hierarchy has changed in that if only half facetiously it is, there was roti kapda at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Now there's roti kapda and Wi-Fi. But more seriously, what's immediately coming alive, Nandini, is that level 4, which is self-esteem. In my understanding, in both sort of my lived experience and in ways, I'm actually offering a course right now in Barcelona at a liberal arts university, and you look at mostly liberal arts universities all around the world, especially in the US, etc. And so if you look at things like cancel culture, they birthed themselves in the liberal arts space, mostly on the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, and then kind of they spread all over the world. And my sense is that self-esteem can be, or self-worth can be a function of many, many things. It can be a function of the relationships you find yourself in, how happy you are in those relationships. It can be career, it can be wealth, etc. The more insidious ones, the more complex ones to locate, disintegrate, and dissolve are the ones where they are a function of the values, beliefs, views, opinions that we hold. And therefore, today, self-worth is a function of how woke I think I am, and how the concept of purity in wokeness can be used to other everyone else. So that my battle is the purest, is the most hardest battle, and therefore now this gives me the rights to have a a solid sense of self, because I think my moral, like the moral ground that I'm perched on, is higher than everyone else's. So self-esteem, and more kind of more accurate way, I think, for me is to say that my self-worth is a function of of so one, like whenever somebody um, um, when I find myself in this conversation with friends, and I I tell them sometimes that at the end of it, I'm going to be fighting for the rights of mosquitoes, pigs, and cockroaches, because no one's fighting for them, right? And you can't get better than that. Like you can't say you can't kind of that I think somewhere around there properly more morality would end for organic objects. Yeah.
You would win. Win.
Yeah.
I
But then
win.
somebody might always say that I'm now fighting for rocks and stones and fossils.
Mm. There
And
you
yeah,
right. So this one upmanship, right? And
which is camouflaged in very, very beautiful ways, which is like the tyranny of language is such. I mean, it is, and it is. I'm not, and I really hope this reaches you and everyone who's watching it. I'm not sitting here in judgment. I mean, irony would die if I were to talk about moral upmanship while feeling that, just because I've located it or recognized that it somehow makes me superior. No, I'm absolutely complicit in it, in witting and unwitting ways. Um, I I just think it is tragic, because then every day when I go to sleep, the quality of my sleep is a function of how much dopamine, outrage fueled dopamine I have in my system. And that is tragic. That's what I mean.
yes, and I understand it. And the thing is, though, because it's such an enabling environment as well, it's a little bit hard to disconnect from the matrix, if you will, and be able to look at it a little bit more clear-headed in that sense.
Yeah.
Although while you were talking about this, I also feel that there could be a factor of wokeness being a little bit of a new language. Therefore, we are so bad at it.
Yeah, sure.
Authoritarianism has had a very long run, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people.
What has had a long run?
Authoritarianism, or
Yeah, sure.
being told what to do, or people in power have had a very long run over centuries, and their messaging and their voice has found a lot of practice.
Right.
And the things that typically come under wokeness, I feel still are babies. They're nascent.
Right.
We're standing them. We're still wrapping our head around them. So I do feel there is something of that newness and that awkwardness in how we're talking about things about, binary genders, or how we're talking about feminism in our age, and all of these things. I see that unpracticed voice, although I recognize the intent, of course, is to actually do good, but it's the novelty of the experience of actually even having a voice, So from my perspective, I condone and I understand some of that comes from that. But I do see that a lot of these things, the wokeness comes very superficially, where in our lived experience, we may perhaps behave very differently from our articulated stance. So there is that.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of all of this play, how does trauma trip us up? How do you find trauma plays a role? And now there is this whole movement, I would say, again, when I say movement, I want to be clear that what we're talking about is really a small percentage of people who it's we are not talking globally, every society, every strata, but I'm talking perhaps more about people who in my environment or in my world that I see, or perhaps a little bit outside of that. So I'm aware that I don't speak for everyone, but there is this understanding now of trauma having a place at the table.
Right.
How do you see that playing out in terms of self-esteem, purpose, and being
Yeah.
actually your most authentic self?
Yeah. Wow. So there's many ways uh of taking this on. Before I do so, like just to kind of close the loop on your previous on the previous conversation we were having, Nandini. It's in how I look at it is that there is actually no but there. It's all and. So everything that you said is 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 yes. And then the fact that the invitation for us is to call our own bluff
Yes.
while we are doing all of this, and simply just know that the invitation here is to call our own bluff and not to weaponize our suffering, which brings us to trauma. That how I define trauma is that it is simultaneously the most important and the most misunderstood thing in the world. And so what do I mean by that, right? So for example, I'd probably use an anecdote and use that um, as a as a springboard to dive into this conversation. This is something that is deeply close to me. I feel very, very, very strongly about it. Um, to the point where I feel the languaging can be different, uh, um, but an understanding of trauma in some sense has to be has to be considered while we are still in school. Some maybe after we are 8 or 10 years old. Anyway, that aside, so one of the things that we do in India is called the Seva pop-up project. Okay, and in the Seva pop-up project, what we do is we walk into orphanages, destitute women centers, schizophrenia resource centers, etc. And for the people that are living there, so for orphans or for people that otherwise don't find a place in quote unquote normal society, or that don't have a family in the normal sense of the word. So we try to create a sense of festival and family for them through food. Okay. And I talk about this, I offer this context in the service of the fact that the last seva that we did was for a group of women who were 14 to 22 years old, who were in the age group of 14 to 22 years old. They had one or two parents afflicted with HIV, and therefore, or they had some of them had HIV themselves, and therefore they all found themselves in this one home where we were, where we were called to do the seva. And so before we go into walk into the place, we kind of have a debriefing within the team, the team that is going to offer the seva. There's a bunch of things that we do. There's dancing, clowning, rangoli making. We engage the kids, sports day, what have you. So we are just talking about, the fact that these kids have undergone a lot of trauma. Okay, we need to be okay if they don't respond. We need to be okay if if they're not enthusiastic. We need to be okay. Like we need to watch ourselves and not make any of this about them. Okay. And we are apprehensive. And I speak Tamil because I grew up in Chennai. And I'm just sitting there, and the girls are also sitting alongside, and I just say, "Hello, Nandini. I've had the opportunity to facilitate suits." Just the response they offered, there was no roof, but if there was a roof, it would have come off. Okay. And it started from there, and we conversed for like 45 minutes, unfiltered, just, like going back and forth. And then spend the rest of the day there. And everyone's experience, and a lot of it is actually has been recorded and has been also been put on Facebook, etc. And you go back thinking, oh my God, every paradigm of trauma suggests that this shouldn't be happening. How are these kids so full of life? And my best guess is, having invested an unhealthy amount of time in the last 12, 15 years on these things, my best guess is that in the East, sometimes when I look at my mother, for example, my mother does not have a sense of self, for better or for worse. So trauma becomes visible, which is not to say that these kids do not have hidden trauma, but trauma becomes visible when you have a sense of self, when you think, oh, this has happened to me. And then doership. So it's like at the deepest level, that thing between the East and the West. And fun fact, 97% of all research that has been carried on in psychology, not just trauma and which is sort of psycho neuro and now there's endocrinology. Earlier it was psycho neuro immunobiology, but now there's also endocrinology, because we're also now measuring the hormones and the neurotransmitters, etc. I'll spare you those details. But 95% of all research has been carried out on people who come from weird countries. Do you know what is weird countries?
No.
Western, educated, industrialized, rich, developed nation. And then that gets homogenized.
Mm.
All research, on the one hand, we talk about genetics and epigenetics and cultures and all of this, but 95% of all research has been done in weird contexts, in weird settings, on weird people. Then you may go ahead. Sorry.
How is that representative then of experiences of people outside of those countries?
It is not, but those are the books that win the Nobel Prizes. Those are the books that get paperback printing. Those are the books that are pirated. Then they come to India and you find them in railway stations and everywhere, and then you pick it up, etc., etc. By the way, which is not the same as saying what someone like a Gabor Mate is saying, who I respect tremendously. Like I feel people normally incarnate after they pass on, but I feel his soul has, or parts of his soul, I find them as like incarnated in me. I mean, I cannot be objective about that man. I'm very, very like, he's very close. He's as close as someone to a spiritual leader, for me. Anyway, so that is not to say that all of it is that, but a lot of the research, a lot of when we talk about trauma, is not representative.
Mm.
So that's basically, I mean, I'm using that to say how much trauma is misunderstood, as much as it is important. And now, in terms of my experience of trauma and in the people that I work with in workshops and in coaching, trauma, the most common form of trauma, that is visible, that can be located, that can be identified, that can be worked with, is the trauma of the nice girl and the good boy. Okay, the programming that goes on where we abandon our needs because it was not safe to be ourselves, because somebody, which may have been micro trauma, may have been chronic trauma, might have been complex trauma. So either somebody repeatedly told you, don't cry like a girl, which I was told a lot. And the levels of violence in that one seemingly, throwaway statement. And I have yet to see anyone, Nandini, maybe in this generation, there will now be people, but in our generation that come before that, the generation that came after us, I have yet to see anyone who doesn't have some remnants of the good, of the good nice girl and good and nice and all of that. And how trauma manifests day to day is that depending on the severity of trauma, you either disassociate yourself, the feelings that you have. So, like in my case, for example, I have located safety in a room by taking responsibility for everyone else's feelings because I was parentified as a kid. Of course, none of this was conscious. My mother was not trying to parentify me. But this happened because that is intergenerational trauma that is getting passed on. And I was parentified. And therefore, the only way, and whether it is my writing, whether it's the way I show up in the world, I may be very skilled at a lot of these things, but it has re traumatized me because I'm constantly performing. Right? I cannot receive love, or I was not able to at any rate until a couple of years back. I would preempt, I would respond, I would reciprocate, I would overcompensate. All of that is trauma. Right? So fundamentally, if there's only one, if you want to have a placeholder of sorts, if you, how do you know you have trauma? Okay, your ability to receive is deeply compromised. Your ability to receive unconditionally, you believe you have to earn something. And of course, the macro structures of the world also have things, a lot to do with it. So patriarchy, capitalism, all of those things, but also our own familial, cultural backgrounds.
How
So
deep
that was a podcast within the podcast. Anyway.
No, it's deeply fascinating because I think trauma is one of those things that we don't really understand very well. Forget about in anybody else, even in ourselves.
Yeah.
And what one of the things you said rings so true about the performance bit, only sort of made worse by our innumerable platforms on which to perform.
Right.
Availability of that, but regardless of that, the performance of our personality as performance, that's sort of become something that seems to be, I don't know what the repercussions of that will be going forward, but it seems to be doing something where there's fear. There's fear of something slipping. God forbid someone should see an unedited photograph. God forbid someone should actually come home unannounced and I'm not in my Instagrammable phone. So I naturally want to then talk a little bit about vulnerability then. In the face of all of this, is that then sort of a pathway to, say, radical acceptance of self? Vulnerability, something that can be explored, or have you in your experience or in your work played with it all?
Yeah. Wow. Each of your questions so far are like
sorry.
I have Byzantine labyrinth-like qualities, like you can enter with it. It's either a palace with many rooms or a cave with many entrances, depending on your poison of choice.
That's
okay.
my
Say that again.
Sorry, I just said that's my mind probably that I'm bringing.
And it's beautiful. It's very fertile, no? It's and I also noticed that this no, which I've started using because I'm in Spain, and in Spain because they're mostly all speaking Spanish, and when they speak in English, they finish a statement by saying whatever they want to say, and they say no. And I have picked this up after having cringe. No, yeah. Okay, so vulnerability is one of the things that is at the heart of the work that I do. Work that we do with individuals in increasingly now both corporates and also the one-on-one and the group retreats and immersions that we have. Let me attempt to actually just tie some pieces that we've left open, in the last few minutes. So we spoke, we spoke about self-esteem. That's where we began the conversation. We spoke about trauma and performance. Um, so one of the ways of making sense of our experience, Nandini, is to say that while there are, and you also spoke about how we might be representative of a small minority of people. So I have a hypothesis, which is that um, even as large-scale problems of unemployment, poverty, inequality exist, never before in the history of human civilization have somewhere between 750 million to a billion people found themselves in a place where they do not have to work to put food on their plate or roof on their head or Wi-Fi, which is muster level one, right? So we can go for maybe a few months or a year or a couple of years without, and which means that we are, and this is super critical, we are not in a scarcity mindset, which has been the legacy, it's like the invisible trauma that has gone on. Scarcity mindset has been there for Rajas and Maharajas because it was in the air that we were breathing and the water that we were. For this 1 billion people, which by the way is the addressable population of any podcast in the world, right? And the other 5 billion people are actually, they still have more sort of tangible, real challenges, etc., etc. And um, for them, after they reach level 3, right, which is that they have their physiological needs met, they have their safety needs met, and they have their social needs met, right? Suburban house, spouse, the children, etc. In my understanding, there's only one of two things you can do. You can either keep changing the furniture in the room, literally or metaphorically. Different job, different career, partner, maybe a sabbatical. I'm going to start a farm. I'm going to go sit in a cave, depending on your predilection.
Mm.
Which is not the same as saying that you shouldn't try any of those things, because all of these things can also come out of expression, right? But once you're at level 3, the choice that you have is to keep changing the furniture in the room, or you start locating how scarcity mindset, how the performance paradigm is living inside of you, how it is something that you want to step out of in a very intentional, meaningful way. If you notice the number of books, conversations, podcasts, TED Talks, Esther Perel, Brené Brown, have you, the reason it has all blown up is because amongst these 1 billion people, a percentage are now saying, I don't want to subscribe to the performance style.
And rearranging furniture.
And rearranging furniture. And now the point is, to be able to do that, you need vulnerability. You need to have a willingness to have difficult conversations with love. Right? And that's where the use case for vulnerability to be able to hold the broken parts inside of us, the broken parts in people that we love. And it's so how I define what it can be defined in many ways. How I define vulnerability. One of the ways in which I define vulnerability is choosing discomfort over discontent. Or a deeper way of looking at excavating it is that me and Nandini, both of us, if we are friends or if we are family or partners, what have you, we come together and we look at something not as a character trait or a behavior or an action that you are doing, but taking like, okay, so this is what is happening. So it is you and me versus this thing as against you versus me. Right? So like, so let's say, for example, something that was taboo, which is taboo even today. For example, if you consider to look at it from the traditional lenses of power and patriarchy and masculine and feminine. But more and more people in the world are now experimenting with a partnership of three through play or throuple, right? Which is like where traditionally, if you're traumatized, you cannot look beyond good touch, bad touch, power equation, etc. But here are three people coming and saying, my God, this whole business of expecting one person to parent, be a pawn star, be a friend, be a confidant is too much. And therefore, authentically, I feel that I have enough love inside of me for two people. Or polyamory. Or, I mean, many, many constellations possible. Right? And this is one kind of vulnerability. And again, even as I say, there's the part in me that judges this as, oh, but this is only for like a very small segment of people. But I'm just giving an example. Vulnerability can be many things. It can be, for instance, something that is probably more relatable to a lot of us, is that saying that by choosing to stay home is not the same for a woman or for a man, is not the same as saying that, I'm choosing to let go of my power, or or any of those things. It is that, no, actually, this is what when I let go of all identities, यही मेरे ज़हन में अभी है. This is what I am about. This is the phase in the journey in my life, and I'm going to honor it. And this means stepping out of thousands of years of conditioning. This means you have to have those conversations. The same, everything that you just described about wokeness, nascent, cradle, awkward, bumbling. Yeah.
Even look at how awkward the word is, thruple. I wish it was a pretty. You can tell it's been devised by very nascent thruplers. But yes, I hear you. I understand it. One of the things when you're talking about vulnerability, I was wondering then, what is it that stops us from being vulnerable? And is it the fear of sort of dissolving or disillusion of self, or like, will I even exist without the face, right?
Yeah.
Will I even exist? And how will I exist? And who will I be? And these sort of existential questions. And again, as we are talking about it, they sound very profound and but actually these play out in very real situations. For example, not being able to stand your ground in front of a workmate, or or a sibling, or not being able to have honest conversations with your parents.
Absolutely.
Friends who may be
codependency, enmeshment, all of entanglement, absolutely everything.
So while I don't want it to come across that this is just a very theoretical sort of discussion,
it is not vulnerable.
It's very, very real. And the other thing that did strike me is, and maybe this is sort of diving right into what you do, is that people don't have a roadmap for vulnerability. They don't know. For instance, you're saying that, all right, if you want to go to the next level, the work needs this language for you to learn. You need to learn this language of vulnerability. I don't have a textbook. I don't know how to learn this language. Nobody has taught me. I have been told nice girl when I have, obeyed. You have been told good boy when you have obeyed. Therefore, there is nothing more beyond that, that validation and that sort of that Pavlovian response to the environment.
Yes.
Therefore, I don't have a roadmap. So there are people like you then who probably are helping large groups of people get in touch with that sort of vulnerability and make it safe for them. You can. It's all right. You're held. You can. But not everybody will reach a GameChangers. Not everybody will have the benefit of you in their lives. So if you were to now say, what can people do to affect these changes in themselves without actually seeking, is there a way, without actually seeking professional help? Is there a way to touch that? Is there a way to reach that?
100%. And there's nothing professional about vulnerability. In fact, I think that the most helpful sign in this moment, Nandini, is that vulnerability is in the zeitgeist. It's in the spirit of our time. It is an idea whose time has come. I've invoked all the European gods. now I'm saying. Um, um, so I think that there's answer embedded in the way you framed your this query, which is that if you are the way the baby steps are, and this sometimes doesn't even need another person, although it's tremendously helpful if you actually have at least one other person for co-regulation, right? And the way I look at it is that it is like जावन, दही बनाने के लिए जावन की जरूरत पड़ती है, फिर अपना दही जरूर बनाओ, पर दही बनाने के लिए जावन की जरूरत पड़ती है. So for us to need that, we need vulnerability. We need to see it in motion. And I have now seen this all over the world. In a room, one person is truly vulnerable and it unlocks vulnerability for the rest of us. Okay. However, if that is not available, find a setting in where you are feeling safe. So it can be in a room, it can be with a book, it can be with some music, it can be a walk in nature. And from there, so and to that end, vulnerability can be indistinguishable from, let's say, journaling, for example, which is just letting those masks drop, letting those filters drop, and see what happens, right? But where possible, with at least one other person, because consent, safety, boundaries, intimacy, emotional dumping, we don't have the time to go into all of those things, but they're all kind of related, oversharing, what have you. And by the way, all I can really share is that there is no reaching the end, like there is the only way to is to what I want to what my deepest longing in this moment is to say that it is okay to overshare. It is okay to sometimes step over boundary, because that vulnerability cannot be antiseptic. So we cannot say that, oh, I want vulnerability, because so for example, in the zeitgeist today, I find a lot of weaponized vulnerability, which is okay. So I've actually created a model around this where there's wounded vulnerability, there's weaponized vulnerability, there's whole vulnerability. And whole vulnerability is where I'm taking radical responsibility for all my feelings. I have absolved you from everything. Like, these are my feelings, my interpretation, but I'm going to wholly own them at the same time, wholly feel them at the same time, wholly express them at the same time. Whereas weaponized vulnerability is that, yes, sir, mere saath hua, and I'm now going to locate this somewhere outside. And wounded vulnerability is where, yes, sir, mere saath hua, oh my God, I'm so broken. I still haven't found the voice to even locate it outside somewhere. And there's a place for everything. Like, it's taken me 12 years to just form the most basic structure around it. And that is okay. And I feel that in the middle of the revolution, in the middle of everything that we've spoken about, wokeness, paradigms being turned over, I hope we're able to locate grace. That there are only quote unquote victims on both sides of the table. We are traumatized in different ways, but that doesn't take away from the fact that we are all traumatized. And to say that you can't speak about this because your ancestors have spoken about it for the last 500 years, you're setting the stage for the next 500 years of trauma. And so I don't know from where this is going to come, but we need to, like, the default dream, one of the things about oppression is that the default dream of the oppressed is then happen in the most unconscious ways, is to become the oppressor. And something needs to break. That stranglehold needs to break.
Yes. Yes. No, this is a podcast on its own.
Yeah.
Right? Each of the things we're touching upon are literally we are just touching upon.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that they do serve as starting points, thought starters for people, because these are important conversations. And sometimes in our everyday life, we are listening to a lot, we're looking at a lot, but I don't know how much we're absorbing. So hopefully this is something that is worthy of being absorbed and thought about. Um, Natural lead on from vulnerability, and this is something obviously that's very real to you. You have very recently lost your dear father. You have dealt in the first person with grief and loss and healing, and from what I hear and what I sense, that there is no timetable for this. There is no sort of where it begins and where it ends. um, and the reason why I bring this up with you today is because you have so much wisdom in which you are able to talk about these things, difficult things, and perhaps what you share around grief and loss and healing may help somebody.
Um, I mean, as we speak, I'm right in the middle of it. The quality of this part of the conversation is going to be perhaps informed by the fact that I'm in the middle of a process as against having completed a process. Not to say that any process is complete, but there's some distance from some of these. And here I'm right, in the middle of. And the things that I would like to share and something that has been really alive to me is that part of the grief that I'm experiencing, that even for someone like me who's doing this work and who ostensibly has a support system in terms of friends who I can reach out to, alongside my own personal grief, but just the lack of holding, lack of acknowledgement. I have met so many people. One of the things that life has done, Nandini, in the last few months, is just people has thrown, in my way, people who have also lost parents and they start, for some reason, lost a parent. And then they tell me, I lost my father 6 years ago or 10 years ago. And they say that, but I don't think I've processed it. And that brings me up like it is heartbreaking. Because to me, that suggests that this invisible thing about, um, and I think there's also a gender angle to it. As a man, I notice often that I'm constantly told, you cannot grieve. Who's going to take care of your mother, right? And so so यहाँ पे, I mean, to use the analogy of the babies and the newborn that we were using earlier in the conversation, यहाँ पे तो impregnation भी नहीं हुआ मेरे. Like we have not even started scratching, let alone develop a vocabulary and understanding for it to come into the zeitgeist. I think grieving is um, absolutely banished to the corner of the society of the bereaved and who want to grieve. I mean, and then you find somebody somewhere, and then you are able to kind of have those conversations. But so just like I feel there is a lack of a tragic lack of awareness, acknowledgement, holding in general anyone who is grieving. And at any given point of time, it is clear that a lot of us are grieving because so many people are passing on every day. So many people are losing their pets, beloved, what have you. And we have sequestered that conversation because I don't see that in broad daylight as much as I see the other conversations.
Mm.
And when I don't see that in broad daylight, I gaslight myself. I mean, mere saath hi ho raha hai. Am I the one who's feeling so deep? Am I the one who's not able to, make sense of my experience? And this is after all the beautiful I mean, for which I'm infinitely grateful for all the folding and the support that has been there. But I still want to say that there isn't, like
Mm.
in 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 general, for the average person out there, there isn't that much. That utna to dikh gaya that there isn't.
What an
Uh,
opportunity there is in that space then to actually to support and to help, because it's going to come to each one of us.
yeah,
You know, this is one thing which makes no distinction of
yeah,
any manner whatsoever.
yeah,
Apart from perhaps, yes, some will be more cushioned in tangible ways or in
yeah.
material ways, and some won't. But what you say is really so powerful, that there is no structure of support. There is no real understanding even. And again, it again brings me back to how the mask, the
Mm,
face is so important, how there is so much fear. It
mm.
almost makes people uncomfortable to be around a grieving person sometimes, because
Oh, absolutely.
they don't know, they don't know what they I don't know where that discomfort comes from, but there is a palpable sort of, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, why doesn't this
Absolutely.
person just get over it, it's been X
Absolutely.
number of days, months, years, move on,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
cannot hold,
Absolutely.
we don't, so yes,
The
I
complex cocktail of my own unexpressed, unacknowledged feeling to my not having the skills. I mean, it's so many things. You're talking about grief. Even expressing gratitude in a lot of places is
Hmm.
seen as you being soft. I mean,
Hmm.
grief की तो हम बाद में बात करेंगे. But gratitude, if a man is expressing gratitude, he's not man enough. It's true.
Hmm.
The unleashing of violence, then the unleashing of inner violence, then because then I have to have a game face on. Who's got time to live with the smallness of heart? But that is, I find myself at a place where I have to get the game face on.
No, you touched briefly on this masculine, the
Hmm.
expectation on the masculine, right?
Ji,
I
ji.
think we will have to have another podcast solely dedicated to that, because
Hmm.
that's such an important conversation about.
Yeah,
I have a 14-year-old son,
right, right.
and the models of masculinity, what does that mean?
Hmm.
And you've spoken so much about male friendships, and you've spoken
Hmm.
about even
Hmm.
male male touch as friends,
Oh, oh my
and
God.
how
Oh
life
my God.
affirming that can be, and how
Yeah.
denied and ridiculed that is in
Oh my.
society.
Oh my.
And
Absolutely.
again, to your eye on Eastern and Western lens, in India, you see two men holding hands and walking on the street. We have seen it.
Yeah.
However, it's the and, it's not either
Yeah.
or.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, we are the first ones to ridicule any male friendship that doesn't subscribe to
Yeah.
our box of what that
Yeah.
should look like.
It's not even art box. It is what has been gifted by like the sort of
And
neo-colonialist architecture. Yeah.
yes, so that is, I won't get into that, but it's a very, very important point of discussion. I do want,
Absolutely.
we're kind of
Absolutely.
running out of time, but I do
Sure.
want definitely talk about something that is very dear to me, and I speak quite openly about it. You're laughing because you probably see every few days there be something, but
No, I'm laughing because you managed to hold on to your horses for this long.
the issue is that there is too much that is of interest, and there is
Hmm.
too much that you have to say that I think is so valuable. Therefore, I have held on. The thing about hate politics, the thing about polarization, the thing about in India, as I'm seeing in Australia, I've seen it in many other places in the world, that there are battle lines, right? The battle lines are being drawn. And today the power rests in one space, perhaps more right, or extreme right or right and all of that. And as sure as day, the pendulum does shift, right, over centuries, as we have seen. Where do you see the place of change makers as yourself in or peacemakers or bridge builders as yourself, where do you see your voice holding this conversation, moving it forward, and actually being able to speak against some of these things? And to what end? Sometimes I do feel to what end.
To what end? Yeah, absolutely.
It's like the wheels of history turn regardless, right?
Regardless. Yeah.
Like my ma says that in Bangla we say, like, you take out your own jala. So you-
Yeah.
so you're
Yeah.
writing basically to just unburden yourself. But
Yeah.
more seriously,
Hmm.
we're seeing it. I see it in young people, polarized, talking so badly about from their heart. It's not a
Yeah.
posture. They're believing it. They're
Yeah,
believing
yeah, it's not posturing, exactly.
they believe that they are the bad guys, and if all of those, that
Hmm.
language of hate, that language of division, that language of
Hmm.
we are better than them and our
Hmm.
religion is better than their, all of this.
Hmm. Hmm.
What are we going to do about it? Or
I think
nothing?
you are a. Say it again.
I said, are we going to do something about it or nothing at all and let it play out? What is your sense?
I think a bit of everything, Nandini. And I mean, on this point, I want to begin with, I think, what I see um, in your work, right? Like, I feel you combine depth and lightness of touch and rage and anger at the same time, not othering. Like, I think the
Trying.
way this part of your persona shows up in the world is actually the ampersand narrative. And I feel like you embody that, where you're fully making space for the rage, but it is not outrage. So there is a lot of rage and you're owning it and
Mm.
still attempting to call your own bluff, still locating a lightness of touch. Um, which is not to say that you're trying to be macabre or anything, but you're like how I receive it is that this intention to say that yes, 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 and I still see your humanity. Not in a spiritually bypassing kind of way, but because we are in this together.
Come, sit, talk, come.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
intention. Like, I wrote to someone who surprised me with being um perception again, a little bit more, favorable to the right than I thought.
Mm,
And
mm,
I immediately wrote and I said, when I spoke to before, I thought it was important because we
mm,
agreed with each other. Now I think it's even more important because we don't agree
mm,
with each
mhm,
other for us to talk.
mm,
And that's sort of my approach. And I think that sort of is your approach as well, in a way, which I
mhm,
find you quite intellectually and and in your personality very bendy, that you will
mm,
be able to make space for
mhm.
other voices. um but
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Um, yeah, I find that, and for the purpose of this conversation, we'll kind of keep the fringe aside, which really is so identified with hate that they are one with it. Okay, so we're not talking about them because there's
Yes.
always going to be that exception to the rule. I'm not addressing that because if I don't make this distinction, then there's always going to be what about three, but what about them? So yes, there's acknowledgement. I think outside of that, most people, I think that when they are if they have a certain kind of leaning, which do not seem logical, they are informed by by just a fear of irrelevance of their way of the world,
Hmm.
everything that they've considered to be true. And now they're in their 50s and their 60s, and now you're saying, hey, ये सब झूठ था. मतलब, who will be able to take that?
Hmm.
Who will be able to take? Who amongst us will be able to take that? Okay.
Correct. Hmm.
So that's one, and which is what is happening. That when you say that, without getting into the specifics, कि ऐसा नहीं था या ऐसा नहीं था. And we say that it is only logical and we have access to podcasts, but for them it is like, what are you saying, man?
And
इनका ये सब नहीं. हाँ, you're
dismantle.
just dismantling. I think there's one. Second, the great thing and the limiting thing about language is that language is expansive and language is extremely divisive. And there's a tyranny of language. So, I mean, a lot of times I notice that what people are really wanting to say, and it goes back to the first piece of the conversation that we were having around the wokeness, etc., that I'm deriving my sense of self-worth by having a different point of view, Nandini. So if I'm deriving my sense of worth by a different point of view, it then follows that I will misunderstand what is already there and make a criticism about it, because I feel only now I am worthy in life. But यार तुम और मैं कुछ अलग बोल ही नहीं रहे हैं. पर शब्द इतने सारे हैं, कॉन्टेक्स्ट इतने सारे हैं, एक्सपीरियंस इतने सारे. So this artificial tragic drawing of lines in the sand and saying, oh, this and that and everything, that is where I feel I want to, like, a part of my mind space, heart space, time, energy, which is I want to shine a light on. ये देखो, ये सब आर्टिफिशियल फ्रैगमेंटेशन कर रखा है हमने, क्योंकि अगर तुम 5 मीटर की साड़ी को एक तरीके से काटोगे तो तुम भूल जाओगे ये टुकड़ा और वो टुकड़ा दोनों 5 मीटर की साड़ी का. And really, can we just see that we are both asking the same question beyond the tyranny of life? No, but this is what they said and this is what they said, but I believe this will be different. And in general, I feel one of the most tragic expressions of love is when people say, we disagree, like you see this in corporate a lot, that I and him have, or I and her have many disagreements, but I love her. Like, the disagreements are so important that you're prefixing your love by saying I and them have disagreements. What are you on about? I mean, something that is so elastic, like your opinion will shift 180 degrees if one fact changes. And you're saying that we have our disagreements. And still I love that person. Like, how much importance are we giving to this? And I find that that could be untenable. Like this focus on content, this hyper vigilant focus on content, this dotting of I's and crossing of T's, the misunderstanding the hone wali hai, because I'm like looking on something that is actually ripe for misunderstanding.
Yes.
So that is where I locate my kind of little rabbit hole here. That can we say that we are saying, can we see? I'm not one to can I just simply invite you to see ke ye matlab we are stewing in the same.
खुद ही देख लो.
खुद ही देख लो. So that fragmentation, that defragmentation, I find to be a very inviting thing in that kind of work that I do.
It absolutely resonated instantly with what my thought was, because the moment you can see that, the argument dissolves by itself.
Yeah.
You don't need to make very strident points about language and content and who said what.
Yeah. Your inability to listen is a trauma response. If I am able to fully see that, then how can I hold that against you? Your inability to listen is not personal. It's a trauma response. So,
not personal is perhaps it should be the holy grail. It is deeply personal.
It is deeply personal and impersonal. Exactly. And that is the tyranny of language. That you can mean so many things. Now, if I am constructing an entire world basis what I understood you to be saying without having ever spoken to you, because sometimes you've long 50 साल पहले लिखा है. But I see, मतलब अगर वो नहीं हो तो फिर नई किताबें कैसे लिखी जाएगी, नए पॉडकास्ट कैसे बनेंगे? I see that. I mean, sure. But yeah, I mean,
I have built myself.
Sense of self.
Myself as liberal, feminist, left, whatever it is, humanist. I can mother, anything, any of these roles.
Yeah.
then you come for any of those, I'm going to attack
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
not
Show me an identity, and I will show you suffering.
show me an identity and I will show you suffering. On that brilliant note, I think we have to call this to an end, but I could probably talk to you for another 5 hours and there'd still be something left over. But thank you so much. And thank you for actually going into lots of different spaces that weren't even in my plan,
Right.
and I always think it's beautiful when that happens. So thank you.
So, thank you for this conversation. Very grateful.